As we begin this conference, to honor the critical scholarship of theologian, mentor, teacher, poet, freedom fighter, Delores Williams, Paul Tillich, Professor Emerita of Theology and Culture, let us remember and call upon the ancestors to bless and open the way for discovery, affirmation, and transformation as we commune with one another and celebrate the 25th anniversary of Dr. Williams' groundbreaking work, Sisters in the Wilderness, The Challenge of Womanist God Talk. So I've got a pitcher of water, and we begin with libation as a way of opening the door for the work that we're about to do today. So as we evoke the memory, let us call upon the names of our ancestors to bring them present at this point in time. So I want to invite you, as you feel led, to call out, to name the ancestors as we pour libation. Janie Harris, Mozilla Hoskins. Let's say together, Ashe, Amen, and Amen. We all please stand. As we continue to evoke the presence of the ancestors and invoke the power and presence of the Spirit, I want to begin with one of my favorite passages in Toni Morrison's Beloved, where Baby Suggs is in the clearing. And she begins with these words, "Here in this place, we flesh. Flesh that weeps, flesh that laughs, flesh that dances with bare feet on grass. You got to love your flesh." So in the midst of a national climate in which we are paralyzed in so many institutions to do that which is just and right, we lament those who have been sacrificed by those unwilling to do what is right, what is just, what is sane, what is moral. And we weep. So I want you to summon whatever is within you, a moan, a holler, an exhaustion of breath. And on the count of 3, I want us to weep, to let out a lament that will express what we feel in this moment regarding those who've been sacrificed along the way. 1, 2, 3. Ah! And breathe. And breathe. And breathe. And breathe. But even in the midst of the violence and the death and the struggle and those who are left behind, we're living and moving and acting and breathing, and we're with one another, and we're trying and we're moving. And as our ancestors did, we found humor in the midst of the pain. So we'll see if this works. I want you to look at your neighbor very quickly and laugh. I hope that was genuine laughter what you got out of that, right? We're flesh here in this place. We flesh. Flesh that weeps, flesh that dances, flesh that laughs, flesh that dances. So in your space, I want you to, whatever you need to do is early in the morning, and whatever you need to do is stretch out and move your body. If you want a little rhythm. Keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. Move your feet. Move, 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 move. Dance, 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 dance. Here in this place we flesh. Here in this place we flesh, flesh that weeps, flesh that laughs, flesh that dances with bare feet on grass. We who are flesh in this place, like Mother Hagar, thirst for water, and having come to the wellspring of this moment, have opened ourselves up to yet another opportunity to hear from the angels and exercise the audacity to name God. And in that moment, in this moment, we stir up the spirit with our bodies through sound and vibrations. Because you are here, the spirit is here. Because we are with one another, the spirit is present, moving to and fro. Because we are here in this place, we are flesh. The spirit is here. So I want to give us an opportunity at this point, because I know some of us haven't seen each other in a long time. And even if you have, and you've seen someone since breakfast, you still may need to catch up. So I want us to gather together in 2 or 3 and remember those who may not know anyone here. But make sure everyone is brought into a group. And I want you to greet one another, introduce yourselves if necessary, but I want you to speak, name why you are here and what you hope to receive. Right, so I'm going to give you as much time as we can. But just find 2 or 3. You can move out, move to a different part of the chapel, but find 2 or 3. Hey, beautiful! Ooh. Here in this place we flesh. And because you are here, the Spirit is here. Delores S. Williams, as Bess B. Johnson, in the book God's Fierce Whimsy, makes a profound assertion that in the midst of the contradictions of life, pushing through structures of oppression and systems of injustice, and fighting for freedom anyhow through direct action, she says, quote, she understood that God would come through, not to deliver us from this, but certainly to move the struggle. We are in a national moment where many of us are trying to refashion, re-envision, find different lanes for the work that we do. When we stand in the midst of our gifts and do our work, through what we do, God moves the struggle. When you work with communities struggling with intimate violence, when you're doing healing work with those who are affected by drug addiction, HIV/AIDS, when you work with those who are transitioning from incarceration and trying to reestablish a productive quality of life, through you and the work that you do, God moves the struggle. When you create institutions that provide safe space for emancipatory theological construction, when you preach the gospel and you pastor in spaces and communities that have been left behind by public policy, when you work with the poor to create spaces to give voice to their needs, their struggle, and to their gifts, through you, what? God moves the struggle. When we are faithful to what God has given us, when we provide spaces for critical discourse, when we stand and mentor those who are in need of direction in these times, when we ourselves put our bodies on the line and march through the streets, when we stand with students who are traumatized by gun violence, through our witness, through our presence, through our action, what? God moves the struggle. When we are struggling ourselves to find a voice, to be impactful, to understand what is happening in our times, to find the right analysis, to do the critical engagement, to understand and dismantle the power structures, when we stand and we move and we visit and we construct and we engage one another and we do direct action on the streets, when we are present, when we are moving, when we are talking, when we are preaching, when we are healing, when we are dancing, when we are creating, when we are writing, when we are doing scholarship, when we are teaching, when we are mentoring, all of these things are powerful because through us, what? God moves the struggle. And I want you to be encouraged even in these times. We see young people now are rising up and using their power and their energy to say no more. And we must stand with them and stand in the gap against those who would dismiss, diminish, or seek to demonize the very sincerity of what it is that they're doing and the justness of their cause. And when we do that, what? God moves the struggle. And I want to encourage you during this time, when there are some of our brothers and sisters who have given political power and placed in the White House someone who is the very biblical definition of a fool, that when you stand, and having done everything that you can do, you still stand. When you tell the truth without mincing words, when you are diligent and consistent, when you listen to those who are disempowered, when you use the tools that you have to do the work of justice in the world. Through you and through the work that you do, God moves the struggle. Let the people of God who know and understand and are willing to continue to move the struggle. Because in all that you do, I want you to understand you are the very enfleshment of divinity. You are the very enfleshment of divinity. When you push up against anti-Africanness and anti-blackness and colonizing Christianity, when you lift up the work and the theology and the practices of those who are in the Caribbean and on the continent, you move us who are stuck in what Kelly Brown Douglas called a closed monotheism of Christianity to understand that our ancestors who moved in ritual ring shouts were not stuck in Christianity, but they moved across the spectrum of what we needed to do to heal and to pull ourselves in to be able to do the work of justice. God moves the struggle. This is what Delores Williams' work was all about, multi-dialogical. We have to find a way to believe what we believe, but to affirm what our ancestors have done and taught us and continue to carry on, but also what our brothers and sisters are creating and constructing right now in their own locales. And through us and through that work, God moves the struggle. Let all those of us who know and will say so proclaim, Ashe, Ashe. Amen, Amen. And Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Bostic. Good morning, all God's children. Good morning to you. Thank you so much for coming out today. My name is Kim McNair. I'm the chair of the Sisters in the Wilderness Preaching Series and the conference today, and it is my joy and delight to greet you all this morning. I'm happy to see you, happy to be in your presence, and I can tell from the smiles on your faces you are also happy to be in each other's presence. I want to say thank you to everyone who took part in pulling this together. And there are many, many, many names, and they are listed in the program, but there is one person in particular I want to mention. But first, I want to thank Alex and Jorge. The reason why the space is clean, the reason why we had a clean place to eat in the social hall is because there are some people working behind the scenes. So if you see Alex and you see Jorge, tell them muchísimo gracias. Let them know that their work is important in order to make this conference happen. I also want to thank Donald Joshua and Boss Diop, who are helping you hear my voice this morning, and who are helping to make sure that you can see the projections that will be part of the program also. I want to read a letter from Dolores' children, and the other person, let's pause for a second. I also want to thank Miss Betty Bolden. Look, turn around and look, turn around and look. The pop-up library that you see as you came in, that was Betty's work. Picking the people who are going to present to you today and the women who preach throughout the month, that was part of Betty's work. I could not stand here and say anything to you if it had not been for the support and love and encouragement of this magnificent woman, Miss Betty Bolden. So in front of everyone, publicly, I want to say thank you so much for all that you do and that you have done. I appreciate and love you deeply. Thank you. A letter from Dolores' children. Dear Reverend McNair and the Trailblazer Committee, on behalf of the Williams family, we would like to express our sincere gratitude for celebrating our mother's scholarship. It is such a distinguished honor for our mother, Delores Williams, to be described as a trailblazer. We are grateful that you and the committee are helping to keep our mother's voice alive. Unfortunately, due to our mother's health challenges, she is unable to attend this momentous celebration. However, Delores Seneva Williams is a fighter. She meets her daily challenges with strength and courage, all the while sharing beautiful smiles and soft kisses that only a mother can provide. We stay strong in our faith, knowing that God is good and love is eternal. God's mercies know no bounds. We thank you again on our mother's behalf for this distinguished honor, and that you keep Delores Seneva Williams, the originator of womanism, in your prayers. It is through her strong faith and determined spirit that she conveys to us, I still have something to say. And that is from Rita, Celeste, Stephen, and Leslie. I'm also here just to make a couple of announcements. One, if you note in the program, we've set aside some tables for the alums who have come back for this momentous occasion to meet with some of the students who are here. The students have had a thirst and desire to connect with those who are trailblazers because they are our future trailblazers. And they want to know, how did you do it here at Union? So please, if you can, avail yourselves of those opportunities. We also have a book. Ms. Betty, would you hold that book up? We're going to circulate this book at lunchtime and then later today for those of us who want to write a message to Delores and her children, and we're going to send that to her after the conference. One final announcement, because I know I am standing in the way of a meal that we are about to have when Dr. JoAnne Marie Terrell comes for the opening plenary, so I will be brief. I was alerted to the fact by Dr. Bostic this morning that the Board of Trustees at Case Western Reserve University has approved a program in African and African American studies, and Dr. Bostic is the founding director of that program. So this is a moment to celebrate. And so as we know that God moves the struggle, I'm going to allow God to move me out of the way so you can hear Dr. Terrell.
To the celebrated faculty and staff of Union Theological Seminary, to students, alumni, and friends of Union Theological Seminary in the city of New York, to my dear friends and sisters from wildernesses near and far, and to the brilliant, magnanimous poet, prophet, and premier womanist we are celebrating today. I would like to preface my address, which I have titled Sapere Aude, the Womanist Legacy of Delores Seneva Williams, with a text. Canto 48 from the Tao Te Ching, the Book of the Way of Life. The student learns by daily increment. The way is gained by daily loss, loss upon loss, until at last comes rest. By letting go, it all gets done. The world is won by those who let it go. But when you try and try, the world is then beyond the winning. I would also like to extend special greetings to our forerunner in womanism who is present here today, Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon. I consider Black women to be the westernmost edge of the concept of everybody. The westernmost edge of the concept of everybody. Like everybody, we are 18 years into the 21st century, and as a result of successive waves of social and technological revolution, the world at hand challenges us to speak transformative God talk with and on behalf of the faith communities to which we belong and that we seek to represent in the religious academy. Whether we are theologians, handlers of sacred texts, historians, psychoanalysts, sociologists, homileticians, professors, pastors, preachers, nuns with and without habits, or laypersons holding any combination of these titles and vocations with an eye on the divine, many of us maintain theistic beliefs contrary to the expectations of generations of saints before us who fervently believed that we would lose both our beliefs and our eternal souls in seminary or cemetery, as they may still say cheekily. In the postmodern moment in which we now find ourselves, we are also challenged to speak relevant God talk to a groundswell of nuns, people who are spiritual but not religious, who may well be believers in God or gods or divine revelation, but are not beholden to the doctrinal precisions that our faith traditions, denominations, and sometimes we ourselves imagine do glory to God, the Dharma, or the way. Or nuns may insist that humankind ourselves should stir up the agency and will to create a better world than the violent, freedom-denying one in which we currently live. Although I am not certain if anyone's optimism concerning human goodwill is warranted, their converse despair seems reasonable to me. It's quite possible that over the course of my time in the wilderness of the religious academy, I may well have become somewhat of a nun myself. I have been in the throes of an internal debate about my spiritual identity, a debate brought on by a transrational experience I had during a lengthy physical illness that has since resolved itself. It was a beatific vision of a golden Buddha smiling on me, radiating joy and peace. If I am perfectly honest, since being granted the vision and having had it interpreted for me, I am not really debating myself anymore, but have rather conceded to walk by faith and not by sight, since I can only see my pathway a brick at a time anyway. Now and again, even the single brick disappears, but here and there, I find breadcrumbs that lead me back to the single brick so I can feel a bit more on solid ground, both secure in my salvation and joyful that I am also a candidate for enlightenment. This joy, ensconced in this opportunity to not know, to not have certainty, to exercise faith actually by risking being wrong, is why I teach my theology students to value their own transrational experiences of serendipity, of dreams and visions, of possessing mystical gifts such as insight, foresight, and second sight as bona fide sources for doing theology in the world at hand, albeit sources that are still subject to verification and authentication by the dictates of conscience and the generative spirit of goodness. As I discovered when I was a student here and since I've become a teacher, a good teacher bids you to do your work, not as an extension of theirs, but as an invitation to think for yourself. You could say that my psycho-spiritual deconstruction was a logical outcome of my deconstruction of evangelicalism in Power in the Blood, which was a response to Delores Williams' example of daring to think for herself. My point was and is that there are often unacknowledged but genuinely felt differences between our narrated confessions and the actual beliefs that guide our perception of the divine at work, that provide our sense of morality, that reinforce our capacity to hope, and that enhance our ability to be at peace with ourselves and others, that more adequately reflect our native spirituality before we ever even had words, much less religion, and much less degrees to describe our empowering, sometimes liberating encounters with things divine and our experiences of divine personages who offer us from time to time a glimpse of their visages, their comforting presence, and their sage advice for navigating this beautiful and brutal world. We who are guided by paradigms of liberation are just as eager as nuns to impeach, prosecute, and remove, see what I did there? The persistently violent habitus of humankind, from of old devolving in our times in the forms of mass incarceration, protracted multiple wars, poverty and immiseration of entire countries, rapacious sexism and racism, body and soul killing heteronormativity, human trafficking, and malfeasance in highest office with demonstrably negative consequences for the nation, the earth, and potentially the entire cosmos. Right there too? Okay. We righteously indignant prophetic types who sometimes maintain tenuous connections to our temples, synagogues, churches, and mosques want, need, and sometimes beg them to assert more valiantly their stakes in the material well-being, salvation, and enlightenment of the children, women, and men of the world who suffer from oppression, those whom our scriptures claim bear divine likeness and imprimatur. We want our faith communities to raise as well, consistently and persistently, their stakes in the peaceful realm our various scriptures claim the God of many names imagines. We who are academic activists are ourselves continually challenged not only to act justly and compassionately on our own and others' behalf, but also to produce in writing critical thought that challenges this state of affairs, and in our reactive, distracted world, expeditiously, even instantaneously. We should remember that we are not peddlers of information. We are rather, or we seek to be anyway, conveyors of wisdom. Wisdom that humankind gained only incrementally through labored collective and private experience, through the offices of time and the forbearance of grace. Wisdom that our ancestors learned to transmit on tablets of stone, on papyri, parchment, vellum, and paper, using chisels, feathers, quills, pencils, and pens. Wisdom that others and we have reproduced for the world's benefit by means of the printing press, mimeographs, typewriters, word processors, personal computers run on DOS, on desktops with microprocessors, laptops, personal tablets, and smartphones. We are heirs and conveyors of wisdom gained through loss upon loss, with no rest in view. It is compelling work viewing the world as a charge, identifying our communities of accountability, and setting ourselves up as willing agents of change in the midst of rapid social and technological change. Nowadays, it is even more humbling imagining ourselves as instruments in the hands of our respective gods and divine personages. And it is daunting fashioning ourselves into scholars, developing disciplinary affinities through expensive, insular, and long programs of study. Whether we willed it or not, our studies often became a sacrifice, not only of time, effort, and resources, but also of connectivity to the persons and the activities we might prefer to engage. We were drawn or driven into the wilderness as Abraham, Hagar, Joseph, Moses, the Buddha, Jesus, the apostles and ascetics, Muhammad and Baha'u'llah had been. And though disconnection was not what we hoped for, and never-ending debt was not what we planned, like them, we have remained firm, and we continue in our commitment to God and the work that beckoned to us when we first heard the call, when we first awoke, when we first believed. Perhaps we were empowered by the thought that beyond the wilderness that is the religious academy, there was waiting for us a special relationship, a family dynamic, a cohort of friends, a religious community, an institution, a promised land in which unconditional love rules, freedom abounds, and justice is always enacted. The desire for these things is reasonable, given that all persons, but especially free persons, are potentially revelatory about the one whose souls we are, on whom we are contingent for air, water, and food in that priority, else we die. Without connectivity, we die. This is the shape of the wilderness that Black women in America have always had to navigate and resist. In slavery and in all our time here, the self-alienation that sexual assault and our increased vulnerability to it can engender. The god-awful separations from beloved kin because of the caprice and capital needs of slaveholders, the device of social services, the manpower needs of the military-industrial complex, and the dramatic losses the African American community incurred, especially in the era of the Vietnam War, and the targeting and censuring of Black boys and men because of the profitability of prisons in this present age of mass incarceration, evidence of the genocidal intent of the dominant culture. Black women have long recognized that the wilderness is vaster, more hostile, and less localizable in singular space and time than we had imagined. That it is around us and it is within us. And thus, given that our corporate and personal liberation is ongoing, never-ending work, never complete, it is imperative that we adopt a permanent posture of self-defense and place a premium on survival and quality of life befitting ourselves and generations following. Black women in the Religious Academy have Delores Williams to thank for these insights. As the living embodiment of sapere aude, one who, following the example of the Roman poet Horace of antiquity and German philosopher Immanuel Kant in the Enlightenment era, one who dares to think for herself, as one who dares to think for herself, hers is a significant voice that continues to reverberate in liberal theological discourse throughout the world. As a premier womanist theologian, she made her impact by interrogating the claims of both Black and feminist theologians who purported to advance the cause of liberation for Black people and women, yet left the experiences of Black women and their understandings of divine reality radically unaccounted for. By widening the discourse to include these experiences and understandings from the underside of history, she helped to create what I referred to earlier as the Western edge of the concept of everybody. She effected with other womanists a paradigm shift of enormous import so that theology can no longer be done in the totalizing way it once was in the liberal religious academy. The student learns by daily increment. The way is gained by daily loss. Thinking for herself and teaching others to do so has not been without cost to this great woman of God. And yes, I called her that. I called her that because her unique devotion was founded in the piety of her family. Born in Louisville, Kentucky, Dr. Williams grew up with her grandmother, grandfather, mother, stepfather, and 2 siblings. Her grandmother, a daughter of slaves, and her mother were Seventh-day Adventists. Her stepfather of the Baptist persuasion, and her grandfather a Presbyterian. Her grandmother's piety and the ecumenical church that formed her and that gave her family its grounding belief that God has touched her is a signal marker of identity for Delores Williams. Born a Williams, she married Robert Williams, a theologian who was a doctoral candidate here at Union and Columbia University until his untimely death. The way is gained by daily loss, loss upon loss, until at last comes rest. At her 1991 installation as the Paul Tillich Chair, the congregation sang the spiritual, "I know that God has laid hands on me." And on many occasions, Dr. Williams personally encouraged me to believe that God will take care of you, another touch point in her family's faith. She once told me that she knew all 3 verses of this beloved hymn of the church. Be not dismayed, whate'er betide, God will take care of you. As a Presbyterian laywoman, although I've heard her referred to as the Reverend Dr. Delores Williams, Dr. Williams has stood outside the welcome embrace of the Black church as well as mainline Protestant churches. In her 1993 book, Sisters in the Wilderness, The Challenge of Womanist God Talk, which has been in continuous publication for 25 years, she demonstrated the inadequacy of the Exodus story with its masculinist overtones and liberation motifs for empowering Black women and their children living in America, offering the story of Hagar with its ethical categories of survival and quality of life as an alternative. In her 1999 Sorensen lecture at Yale Divinity School, which provides the title of this conference, Beyond the Temple Door, There Is No Promised Land, she continued to call into question the adequacy of the liberation motif for Black women and children. She fearlessly challenged the patriarchy of the Black church and the larger society, and co-teaching with the late Beverly Harrison, she also challenged the racism of white feminists who were also her friends. Most enduringly, and perhaps most infamously, she challenged the doctrinal certitude of Orthodox thinkers concerning that touchstone of most Christian theologies, the doctrine of the atonement. During the Reimagining Conference of 1993, she characterized Christian preoccupation with the cross as an undue focus on the suffering of Jesus as a surrogate act, which moreover is used to sanction the surrogate roles that Black women and women of color internationally have been compelled to assume. Through her many writings, Dr. Williams provided an efficacious platform and cogent theological questions that permitted the emergence of African womanist, Latina mujerista, and Asian feminist perspectives. Thus, the international scope and significance of her work for the survival and liberation of Black women and women of color cannot be overstated. As Scripture states so pointedly in Dr. Williams' case, a prophet is not without honor except in her own country. In daring to think for herself, Delores Williams teaches us who are extending her legacy into discourses in the 21st century and beyond that there is no use in believing that we can rise to the challenge of speaking transformative God talk with the world at hand if we are unwilling to think for ourselves, unwilling to be transformed ourselves, or unwilling to see the losses we suffer in the strictures of mortality, and when we share doctrinal certainty as a grand opportunity to exercise faith actually. In daring to think for herself, Delores Williams teaches us that there is no use imagining that we do glory to God without resourcing our transrational experience, speaking our truth, risking being wrong, and even risking censure. In daring to think for herself, Delores Williams teaches us we can hardly speak of God at all if we do not believe, because, as she confessed to me, God lives, and the righteousness of God is higher than any amount of pain that we can have. And that is why we can rest in the belief that whatever we lose, God will take care of us. Without this fundamental connectivity, we die. Without each other, we die sooner than we might. In calling us to sisterhood, she teaches us who are navigating the wilderness to do so together.